Hey all, welcome to ShareTrek. This is Raj here, and today's topic is going to be supply chain. And what you can expect to get from this video is first of all a granular understanding of the supply chain, which in turn will help you make sense of the news articles that you see and read, and understand how it's going to affect the supply chain and how things can improve or get worse. That's point number one. Point number two is that there is a company right now in the NASDAQ which is way ahead of everyone else when it comes to supply chains. In fact, they have been planning for more than 5 years for exactly what's happening right now, and they are doing extremely well. So stick around until the end of this video to know which company it is. And finally, if you're here for the first time, please subscribe to our channel and watch this video, and please put your comments below. We'd like to have you as part of our community. With that said, let's get started. Hello friends. On our daily update, you would know that I have always been harping on Russia-Ukraine conflict, China lockdown, and supply chain disruption as the central cause of inflation. So in this video, we are going to look into supply chain disruptions, and how they started. Supply chain disruption started with trade restrictions and then got worse with COVID. At the overall level, the supply chain disruption started with US trade war with China. This led many industries to search for alternative sourcing and for the Chinese to look for alternative markets. In the next episode of that, we had sanctions against Russia, which caused disruptions as sellers to Russia sought new markets and buyers from Russia sought new sources. And you already know that Otis and McDonald's and Siemens AG all have left Russia. There are many companies, international companies that have left Russia. So there are incomplete projects out there which need to be completed. And there are planes, like there's an Irish charter company, which is the biggest charterer of planes. They lease out planes to various countries and various airlines. They had a whole bunch of airplanes which were sitting in Russian airports. They are all gone now. The company cannot get them. So things like that have happened. And also containers are in the mix when you look at the overall picture. And as we investigate the supply chain model, we will see how these two factors combined with COVID lockdowns cause inflation. When I say these two factors, I'm talking about the sanctions against Russia and the trade war with China, and also the COVID pandemic. So let us look at the elements that combine to complete the supply chain. So the first element is the production in the factory. It is followed by delivery from the factory to the port, for which you need trucks, chassis, container, driver, and fuel. So let me clarify the difference between them. Truck is just the engine, the one that you see in the front of a truck. The chassis is the flatbed at the back with multiple wheels on it. And then the container is the one, the box that sits on top of the chassis. And the reason why there is a shortage of chassis is because when a container is delivered to a warehouse, the warehouse has got docking ports at the back, and the truck backs into the docking port, and the container is opened from inside the warehouse, and they start unloading it, but the truck can't wait there until all unloading is complete. So the truck disconnects from the chassis and proceeds to its next destination. So now the warehouse has got a chassis with a container mounted on top of it, and once they have emptied it, another truck will have to come, hitch itself to the chassis and pull it out and take it away to the port. So that's the difference between a container and a chassis. So now that we have settled that, let's go ahead and look at the other elements. On delivery to the port needs to process the container through customs and load it into the ship. Here the chassis becomes free. The container is taken out of the chassis, and the customs processes it, and it goes onto a crane, and it gets loaded onto a ship. In order for it to be loaded on the ship first should have unloaded all the containers that it came to the dock with, and then the port needs to lift the container from the ship, put it on the chassis, and then a truck has to take the chassis along with the container and move towards the warehouse. The truck has to unload the container and chassis at the warehouse port until it is emptied, and then take the empty chassis and container back to the port. So this is the whole cycle. Empty container has to be loaded with the cargo for return destination so that it doesn't go empty all the way from the warehouse to the ship. Now that is where we have an inefficiency out here, and there are alliances being built between big companies to make sure that they can pool those empty chassis and fill them up, and make sure that the return trip from the warehouse to the port doesn't happen to have an empty container. So once it goes to the port, it has to be cleared by customs and then loaded onto the ship and then sent off. So this is a whole cycle with which the supply chain works. And what happened is when COVID stuck and lockdown started, we had docks which were not working because there were no workers going to work. The government had put a lockdown, and it happened worldwide. It was not just in US. And as a result, containers never returned to the point of origin. They all got stuck like in time. They were stuck where they were in time. Earlier, when the supply chain was moving like a well-oiled machinery, everything was coming and going in sequence. But now when everything was disrupted, there were containers on chassis sitting at the warehouse, and there were containers sitting in the port, and then there were containers which are sitting on ships which are waiting to dock. And also there were factories in Asia and other places which had manufactured the goods, but they couldn't find the containers in which to put them. So this is the kind of mess that we are looking at. And factory under lockdown could not produce, but when they started producing, there was a shortage of containers and chassis, as I mentioned. Containers started becoming hard to come by and started costing more. And if you have been a regular on YouTube and you watch those home projects, we had small homes projects, and we had homes which are made out of containers. So containers were super cheap. People could buy 2 or 3 containers, stack them together, and give them an outer shell and do some renovations inside, and you had a house ready. There are a lot of YouTube shows like that happening because containers were very cheap. But now with the advent of COVID and everything being frozen where they were, containers started costing more, and it became very difficult to obtain containers. On reaching American shores, the container ships carrying around 24,000 containers could not dock due to bottlenecks at the port. And 24,000 is the capacity of super ships. And people, when I say people, I mean buyers like to use super ships because when they ship 24,000 containers, the cost per container comes down drastically. If they were to do that with a 10,000 container ship, it would cost them much more. So most of the big buyers like to have these super containers, and there were plenty of super containers waiting at the dock, waiting to dock into ports in California. There was a big backlog. The port was then authorized by the government to start working 24/7, but still relief was not in sight because there was a shortage of truckers, and also if you are doing 24/7 for customs, that means you need to have customs working multiple shifts, and that had to be organized, and there should be negotiation with the union, etc., etc. So those things are a bit delicate, but that was accomplished. And then there was a shortage of truckers. Now, there I have seen some documentaries. I think it was made by CNBC or somebody about how truckers were having a difficult time and why many of them quit their jobs. So now trucking companies are looking at hiring teenage truckers. It's become that desperate. So there was a shortage of truck drivers. So the docks started filling up with containers, and they had to be taken out before other ships could be unloaded. So even after making it 24/7, we still had a backlog. And all along this chain, at every stage, the supply chain uses gas, which has become much expensive. So that also adds to inflation. And everything overall, the shipping has become expensive. We also should not forget that due to sanctions and trade war, companies have been reorganizing their supply chains. And so the containers and ships are being rerouted to carry goods from new sources. On top of this, you have increasing insurance cost as well. So you can imagine what a mess the supply chain really is for any company that is sourcing parts and products from different parts of the world and working on a just-in-time kind of inventory control model. So those kind of companies struggled a lot. Orders just made just before COVID came took much longer to potentially reach the shelves because they had to wait for a long time in the sea. Some anecdotes even say they had to wait for around 24 months before they could reach the stores. And by the time the fashion trend had changed, the demands had changed. So in Q1, we had a lot of companies, especially in apparels, talking about doing a lot of highly discounted sales to clear inventories. So many stores had to sell at heavy discounts, and as a result, they incurred lower than expected earnings and profit margins. And that also contributed to NASDAQ going down and the S&P 500 going down. There is one company that stands out among all this who had the foresight in planning for backward integration into the supply chain logistics. And you can guess which company it is. The company is Amazon. Amazon makes its own containers. It started making its own containers a few years ago. So the shortages of container does not apply to Amazon. And as a result of which, the high price of containers does not impact Amazon. They have got their own containers to the extent that now they can use their containers to move it either by trucks or by train, or they could also take other means of transport. They have sufficient amount of containers. So they have taken care of that aspect. Amazon is also big enough to charter ships, and they had been wise enough to charter smaller ships which carry around 10,000 containers, as a result of which they have been able to get into lesser known ports where there is not much of a congestion. And it's also been reported that sometimes when there are very in-demand products, one of the example I saw was hot tubs. Hot tubs are very much in demand, and people are willing to pay a premium. So Amazon actually shipped them by air and delivered it to its clients. And all the time Amazon was saying, you place the order and you're going to get it in time. It's just that you have to pay a premium, and they were able to deliver. So Amazon did a great job out there. Amazon has spent over $61 billion in 2020 towards putting in place most of the shipping assets. Amazon has built a system to collect data that can predict specific items in demand and can order in advance in anticipation of the order to deliver. And they were able to reduce their order to delivery time significantly. However, if you, like me, have been ordering from Amazon, you would have noticed that at the height of COVID, their ability to do the same day delivery had suffered significantly. And also their delivery of some items went beyond the normal duration, but they were good enough to make good for the clients through their excellent customer service. So that's how Amazon was able to tide over. During the COVID crisis, Amazon repurposed older ships to carry containers and was not shy in putting high demand items in smaller ships so that they could use smaller ports that were not as congested, even though it meant having a little extra cost added to it. And that's how Amazon started making itself differentiating itself from its competitors and staying a step ahead. Starting in 2016, it is reported that Amazon has built a fleet of planes for cargo transport. Each of these planes can carry 5 container loads at a time. Of course, it is still a bit expensive, but they were in a situation where they would never have empty shelves, and they could meet all the orders. They didn't have to cancel any order because they didn't have the stocks in hand. Starting in 2016, it's reported that Amazon had built a fleet of planes for cargo transport. It said that each of these planes can carry 5 containers load at a time. 5 container load means it's going to cost a little more for those goods, but still, Amazon made sure that it was in a situation where it did not have to refuse any order because they didn't have a stock. And they made sure that they could book the order and deliver the stock. Of course, their service level agreement did suffer a bit. Those of you who have been buying through Amazon, you would have experienced the same day delivery. In case of some items was not the same day delivery. And also in case of some other items, the delay was much more. But still they were able to deliver only because they were foresighted to put a lot of infrastructure into place into their logistics system. There is still a lot of optimization that is possible as per experts. Right now, a few companies have collaborated to optimize the chassis and container returns. For example, when an empty container is returning to the port, another loaded container is also going to the port at the same time. That is where collaboration is possible to avoid sending empty containers in any direction. This can reduce major costs and also it can reduce the need for the number of trucks and therefore number of drivers, and be a much better, much more optimized supply chain. And that's what a few companies are working towards. They're forming alliances, putting systems in place to identify where there could be economies of combining their cargo and destination. Amazon is soon reaching a situation where it can sell empty space in its shipping assets and recoup fixed costs and part of variable cost as well, thus making its own shipping costs to be optimized and the lowest possible among all other entities that are shipping along with it. Well, to conclude, what I would say is that the supply chain system is a bit complex and it's improving slowly, but not fast enough to give us relief from inflation. But things are getting there slowly and steadily, and it will work out sooner rather than later. And we as investors now have a bit of a grip on what are the components that go into making the supply chain happen. And when we read a news article or we see an item on TV, which talks about any of these components, we can instantly get an idea whether it's going to be something good for the inflation or it's going to exacerbate the inflation further. With that knowledge, we can always anticipate what the stock prices would do as a result. So with that said, I think I would like to bring this video to an end. I've tried a new format out here. We constantly try to do new things in the channel for continuous improvement. If you like this video, please press a like out there. And if you have not yet subscribed, why not? Just subscribe and join our channel and help us grow this channel. Thanks and have a great day. Bye for now.